Our Ed O'Keefe is ensconced with all of our colleagues in the press corps over there in the room down the aisle from the actual debate location. Ed,
and because we know Vance is going to talk about it, he's going to sit here and he's going to tell Walz about how Kamala is the border czar and how she's let in all these immigrants. And I guarantee they're going to bring that damn the 14,000 like illegal immigrants who have been arrested, whatever, under Biden and Harris. They always fail to state how that is 14,000 total illegal immigrants, like in the country right now, that are currently like imprisoned for like violent crimes, right? It's like that's not just under Biden, Harris. It's under Trump. That's under Obama. That's under Bush. I mean, it's all of them. You're what is it, like 6 times more likely to commit a violent crime if you're an American?
All right, Ed, you don't
it's just more fear-mongering from the right.
With you when
Shocker.
It is all over, and we are now just officially minutes away from the start of this debate. I want to get your final thoughts, Major. I want to start with you because we've been saying so much is on the line tonight. How much of tonight is about the audience of one for J.D. Vance?
A considerable amount. President Trump has expectations for J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance knows, as Robert Costa so thoroughly laid out, at age 40, his entire political career is ahead of him. If this ticket does not prevail, the Republican Party will find itself in an uncomfortable and unwelcome and unwanted post-Trump era. What role does J.D. Vance play in that? A considerable amount of that decision will be drawn from what he does tonight. He knows that. In contrast, Governor Walz is 60, 1 year older than Kamala Harris. He does not have any obvious designs on the presidency if Kamala Harris wins and serves out 2 terms. He's there to enhance the ticket as it exists and amplify things on the positive side where and when he can. Very different calculations, very different risk factors for the two.
And Bob, even if you're Bob Dole, who had a bad night in 1976, he was the nominee 20 years later for the Republican Party. So you can even rescue yourself from a bad night. What are your final thoughts on tonight?
Everybody in the press, when we're in the press galleries, on the campaign planes, they talk about these vice presidential debates as low impact, but they really are high stakes. Everybody watching tonight knows one of these 2 men could become president.
I don't think there's anybody watching right now
who's
going to be on the fence about this.
On character, on policy.
I think everyone's just kind of looking to hopefully see the other one fumble, other one mess up.
One of them might be leading the country. Should a crisis happen, a heartbeat
you
away
either
from the
are
presidency.
delusional and think that everything that Trump says is completely correct, or you live in reality and see that Kamala Harris has an actual background in politics, knows how the country
one
works,
day one of these people could be
and
president.
it's clearly the obvious choice here. I mean, their biggest attacks against her are sexist, racist.
That's what the history always tells us.
Nancy, the other big event is the
sexist, racist, or just lies.
Which also is a platform
like shared
for
lies.
presidents.
It is because
I urge anyone who genuinely believes that Kamala Harris, as VP, let in
they look at how you
immigrants
handle
into the
something
border,
like that, and they
to
say
really
this
just
person is
Google
capable
something.
of
Google
handling big, important
what are the
things.
vice president's
and that's why
duties?
President Biden tomorrow is heading
I think
to
it's like
North
3
Carolina
things.
and South Carolina,
They're the leader of the
Florida, and
Senate,
Georgia
the
next
president of the
time.
Senate, so they're a tiebreaker vote. They can't vote unless it's a tiebreaking.
Standing alone man behind his lectern. Ed, give us your last thoughts as we watch here as J.D. Vance is off.
And they're supposed to be there if the president dies, and that's it.
It's performance,
so why anyone seems to think that she would be a border czar or control of it, it's ridiculous.
For a viral moment.
I mean, come on, it's a Google search, but people act like it's the hardest fucking thing they've ever had to do.
There you have Governor Walz appears to be taking some
Yeah, let's
notes.
listen to the guy who thinks that somebody turned black or turned
colleagues.
Indian. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Before the cameras came.
That's right. Well, we have the vice presidential debate coming up in a moment. It will be moderated by our own Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan.
Yeah, not even the
Ohio
point
Senator
that, like,
J.D. Vance.
Was it J.D. Vance and Walz are told they can't, they're not going to have the live fact checking.
Stick with us here and join us also on our
sad,
streaming channel, CBS News
right,
24/7.
That should even be a thing. I mean, it's very clear which person doesn't want fact checking or which side. It definitely seems like the Republicans just are constantly just moving the goalposts more and more, where it's like, yeah, there probably should be fact-checking if your candidate is literally saying that a group of people in this country are eating people's pets. This is blatant, like, just hate and racism. It's ridiculous.
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become Vice President of the United States. Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts
I mean, it should
now.
not be anywhere near as close as they're saying.
We're going to take this country
I
back.
mean, you do have a side literally lying to the American people, and you have a side that wants to institute a child tax credit and help people get homes. It's crazy to me there's an option there.
Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS
by the way,
News special,
for anyone watching, I hate to tell you, I am
News
biased.
Headquarters in New York. America
I may sound like a
decides
redneck
the
pig,
vice
but
presidential
unfortunately, I do
debate.
vote for blue almost always. That's at
Good
this
evening,
point.
I'm Nora
Goodness, I'd
O'Donnell,
vote for
and thank
anything
you for
over
joining
Trump.
us for tonight's
They can still
CBS
will
News Vice
Biden out in a
Presidential
fucking
debate.
urn or a
We want
casket,
to
I'll
welcome
still
our
vote
viewers
for him.
on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us.
Oh, man, I was
Let's get
really
started.
hoping that we'd get a chance to see
Tonight,
them
our
walk
country
out.
is facing
'Cause I wanted to see
several
another
unfolding
situation where they'd
crises.
be
The Middle
shaking
East is on
hands.
the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact
There's
of
no way
Hurricane
J.D. Vance
Helene.
shook
And now a
Walz's
labor
hands.
strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Oh, goodness.
But
I hope
the
I'm
expansion
mistaken.
of Israel
It
and
seems
its
like he's a little
proxies
bit
is an
nervous going into
absolute
this, which I
fundamental
wouldn't be able to blame him. He's already
necessity
kind
for
of
the United
tripping over
States to have
himself
the steady
some.
leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen
wonder
a
if they'll talk
calmness
about
that
J.D.
is
Vance
able
being
to
a
be
never
able to
Trumper.
draw on the
I mean, it's a
coalitions to
popular
bring them
clip.
together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are.
But kudos to Vance
I was raised in a working-class family. My
greeting,
mother required food
Walz
assistance for
and the
periods of her life. My
moderators.
grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world.
So it's
now,
interesting that J.D. Vance saying that Donald Trump's all for all this stuff.
The question, look,
but
it
can
is
somebody
up to
find
Israel
like one
what they
clip
think they need to do
of
to
Trump
keep their
saying
country
any of that?
safe, and we should support
Like,
our
genuinely.
allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank
I'd
you,
say
Senator.
at least J.D. Vance is
Governor
speaking
Walz,
in
do you care to
complete
respond to
sentences,
any
which
of
is
the
a
allegations?
huge win
Well,
for the
look,
Trump
Donald
campaign.
Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently
So there it is
made
again.
the
They're going to
world
sit there
more
and they're going to
secure.
try to
Now,
blame
we
it on
talk
the
about
vice president because they know they can't blame
sequence of
Biden, right?
events
They blame
that
Biden.
led us to
Biden's
where
not
we
running.
are
It doesn't
right
help their
now,
cause.
and you can't
to be clear, the vice
October
president
the 7th, which I appreciate
is a
Governor Walz bringing
tie-breaking vote
up.
in the Senate
But when did Iran
and a stand-in
Hamas
for the
and their
president
proxies
if
attack
he dies.
Israel? It was
And
during
I know
the
as much as people
administration
want to
of
joke about
Kamala
Biden,
Harris.
he is
So
still alive,
Governor Walz can
technically.
criticize Donald Trump's tweets,
So
but effective, smart diplomacy
she hasn't been
and
president, so
peace
there's no way
through
to know
strength is
what
how
she
you bring
is actually
stability back to
capable
a
of.
very
That said,
broken
you can expect it
world.
to be very
Donald
similar to
Trump has
Biden's,
already done it once
but,
before. Ask yourself at
come
home.
on. Any attack against her and
when was
her
the
leadership
last
is just
time- I'm 40
unfounded
years old. When was the
entirely.
last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
That's also
Gentlemen,
incorrect,
we have
by
a
the
lot
way.
to get
We
to.
had
Nora?
Margaret,
drone
thank you.
strikes
Let's turn now
against
to Hurricane Helene. The storm could
fucking
become
Iran.
one of the
We
deadliest on
killed
record.
people
More
in the
than
Hezbollah terrorist
160
organization,
people
and
are
that
dead,
directly
and
benefited
hundreds
Israel,
more
who
are
they
missing.
wanted them dead.
Scientists
So,
say climate
to
change
say
makes
we
these
weren't
hurricanes
in any part of the
larger,
war. Not to mention,
stronger,
Ukraine
and
was
more
still
deadly
annexing
because
and
of the
controlling
historic
Crimea, and
rainfall.
still are.
Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans
it's kinda crazy
and
to
more
say there
than
was no new wars. I
60%
mean,
of Republicans under
it's
the
very hit
age
or
of
miss on that.
45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure.
Please
So
say
first
it's
of all,
not
let's
real.
start with the
That'd be crazy.
hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Fantastic point.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes.
If Walz can bring
We
up
got
the
close to an agreement, 'cause
the
all those
union
things
pullout
are
right
happening.
now,
Look,
the
first
strike.
of all,
You're
it
talking
is
about
a
wanting to put money
horrific
back into the American
tragedy,
workers. Those are the people who
with
need it
this
right now.
hurricane.
Walz
And
says
my
it's
heart
slam
goes
dunk on
out
the
to the folks
Republicans
that are
right now
down
on
there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together to all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats
And
will use here.
don't forget, he had 4 years as a president while having control of the House and the Senate and passed barely any legislation at all. And his biggest promise was about the wall, followed by his
solar panels that are made in China. Number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China.
Trump's biggest promises were about that wall and about getting rid and replacing the Affordable Care Act, of which he did neither. Right? Mexico was supposed to pay for that wall.
We haven't built a nuclear facility.
It never got built.
And
again, let me remind you, he had control of the Senate, had control of the House of Representatives, and they passed nothing towards it. And we still have the Affordable Care Act. Biden helped reinforce the Affordable Care Act.
Look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know.
We're producing more oil than we ever have as a country.
These are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters.
All Walz has to do is hammer
your
on
campaign
the border
is pledging
bill
to carry
that
out
Trump
the
had the
largest
Senate
mass
just kill.
deportation plan in
That's all he has
American
to do.
history, and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said
blaming
that she
Kamala
wanted
Harris
to
on
undo
it.
all
Let's be
of Donald
very
Trump's
clear.
border policies.
Kamala Harris
94
has
executive
no
orders
control over the
suspending
border.
deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country.
As to what that big
I had
border
a
bill
mother who
did?
struggled with
Among a
opioid
ton of other
addiction
stuff,
and has
it also
gotten clean.
greatly reduced the amount of asylum seekers we allow into the country each day
to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities
Donald
at
Trump called the
record
senators.
levels. So you've
They
got to
killed the bill
stop
before
the bleeding.
they ever even got a chance
Re-implement
to
Donald
read it.
Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations, and that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret,
also
is you
that
ask about
20 to
family
25 million
separation.
number.
Right now,
The Pew Research Center, as of 2022, said there were 11 million
that the Department of Homeland
unauthorized
Security has
immigrants in the
effectively
U.S.
lost.
Where's he
Some of
getting
them have
20
been
to
sex
25
trafficked.
million
Some of them
from?
hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that.
So
it would be good for all
Kamala
of us.
Harris screwed up
Governor,
whenever she was not in power.
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things, regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history.
Is the vice
30%
president.
decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there.
Keep in mind, by the way, if anyone's actually read the border bill itself, a lot of Democrats were not actually very happy with it. They just wanted to get it passed to help the border, right? And they knew that the only way to get it is by having a bunch of right-wing stuff. They're talking about putting ankle monitors on illegal immigrants.
Told them to vote against it because
I don't know why people say catch and release. It definitely was not that. They're wanting to hold people for like extended periods of time and just straight up kick people out and deny people asylum, even if they might need it. But in order to get the Republicans to sign on to it, they're like, yeah, we'll go with that. It's fine.
Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall. And Mexico will pay for it.
And remember, Trump promised that wall
got built,
while he had control of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
9 years
That's all you
after he
need to
came
pass a
down
law.
that
That's it. And he couldn't do it.
Dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to
look that
undo
up and see if you can
Donald
find,
Trump's
I don't know,
border
like
policy.
one
She did
video,
exactly
one
that. We had
piece
a
of evidence that
record number
supports
of
the claim that
illegal crossings. We
Kamala
had a
Harris
record number
has
of
children
fentanyl coming
drug
into our
mules.
country. And now that she's
Keep in
running
mind
for
that everyone
president,
has a
or a few months
smartphone now
before,
with
she says that somehow she
fantastic
got
cameras
religion
on
and
them.
cared a lot about a piece of
Why is there no
legislation.
proof?
The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America.
I don't hate
parents
them,
who
right?
can't afford health
Donald
care,
Trump,
schools
maybe,
that are overwhelmed. It's got
the vast
to stop,
majority
and
of
it
your
will when Donald
uncles,
Trump is
right?
president
Your
again.
aunts,
Your
your
time is
cousins
up,
who
Governor.
are living across the creek.
What about our CBS
It's not
News
that
polling,
they're
which
idiots,
does show that a
right?
majority
And some of them might
Americans,
be,
more
let's
than
be honest.
50%,
But
support
they've
mass
been lied to,
deportations.
and they've just been fed this delusional world that's just not true. And they're scared, and they're worried about what's happening.
You demonize
and so it's not really a shocker they believe people like
Senator
J.D. Vance and Donald Trump.
Surprises me on this.
But
talking about
there's just
saying I
no
will
proof.
create
There's no
stories to
facts
bring
behind what
attention
they
to this.
say.
That vilified
It's all about
a large
scare
number of people
and
who were
fear
here
and
legally
hate
in
and
the
anger
community of
and
Springfield.
racism and
The
sexism.
Republican
They just
governor
eat it up.
said, it's not true. Don't do it.
It's ridiculous.
There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just
president using
empowering
executive
law
order
enforcement to do
to
their
pass
job. I've been to
Congress
the
on
southern border
everything
more
he
than
wants
our
to
borders
do.
are. Kamala
That's
Harris
not
has
a
been.
democracy. That's
And
not
it's
a
actually
republic. That
heartbreaking
is a
because the Border Patrol
authoritarian
agents,
dictatorship.
they just
Let's be
want to
very
be
clear. That's
empowered to
what
do
Trump
their
wants.
job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans.
He didn't say that the schools are struggling. No, he said they're Haitian immigrants are eating people's
pets. The American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot,
better be careful. It looks like
Matthew
Walz actually read the
25:40
bill.
talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status.
I was about to say, let's be very clear. They aren't illegal either.
Margaret,
but
Thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn now to the economy. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
The
Cut
rules
him
were
off.
that you guys weren't going to fact check.
Cut
And since
him
you're
off.
fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the
Oh my
CBP One app, where you can go
So
on
there it is.
as an illegal
For any
migrant,
Republican
apply
who wants to
for
sit here and say
asylum or
that's
apply for
biased
parole
towards
and be
Democrats, this is the
granted
shit that
legal
happens,
status
where they just talk
at
over the
wave
moderators
of a
and
Kamala
they just let them
Harris
do it.
open border wand. That is not a person
want
coming
everyone
in
to say,
applying for a green
if
card and
Walz
waiting
had
for
just
10
done that,
years.
what do you think the
That
response
is
would be?
implementation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Look, he's
We
just
have
yapping.
so
Been on
much.
the book since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
want to have.
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris.
Oh, see, they cut his.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion.
Well, let's also remember
How would you
that
pay for that without
during Donald
ballooning
Trump's
the deficit?
presidency, we
Governor,
had
I'll
the
give you 2 minutes.
highest
Yeah,
increase
thank
in our
you. And
deficit
Kamala
ever
Harris
in
and
our
I do
presidency.
believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that.
Let's
Look,
not
the
forget
$35
that
insulin is a
practically
good
every
thing,
Republican in
but
the
it
Senate
costs
voted
$5 to make
against
insulin.
capping the
They
cost
were
of
charging
insulin for elderly
$800
people.
before this law went into effect. As
Right?
far as the
That-
housing goes,
that
I've
only
seen it in
hurts one
Minnesota,
person,
12%
and
more
that
houses
is
in Minneapolis.
Big Pharma,
Prices went
who
down
wants to
on
sit there
rent
and charge
4%. It's
$1,900 a
working.
month
And then
for
making
people
sure
who
tax
need
cuts
this
go to the
life-saving
middle
drug.
class. $6,000 child
Right?
tax credit. We have
You
one
want
in
to know
Minnesota.
who was the tie-breaking vote and make sure that
childhood
we're
poverty by
able
a
to cap
third. We
insulin for
save
these
money in the
elderly
long
people,
run,
these
and we
grandmas
do
or
the right
grandpas
thing
who
for
need to
families.
live.
And then
Kamala
getting businesses
Harris
off the ground.
was the
The
one
law as
who
it stands
passed
right
that
now is
tie-breaking vote.
$5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago. He said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing
There it is.
a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees,
I'm
including businesses, it
convinced
would
that Trump does not understand what a tariff is. And for anyone who thinks that it is not a sales tax,
a recession. Look, this is simple.
look up
for
what a
you.
tariff
Where
does.
are we going? Kamala
Really,
Harris
just
has
look
said
it
to
up.
do the things she wants to do.
Because all
We'll
it does
just ask
is
the
it says,
wealthiest to
hey,
pay their fair share.
you're wanting to
When
ship
you
that
do
stuff in.
that,
We're going to charge
our
you
system
20%
works
more to
best.
ship it in. And
More
they're going to
people
go,
are
okay,
participating in it, and folks
fuck
have
you.
the things that they
We're going to
need.
make your people pay for it. And then
Senator,
people
I
go,
wanna give
wait
you
a
moment
minute,
to respond
I
on
don't
that,
want
but
to pay that.
similarly,
That
the Wharton
sucks.
School has done an
And the
analysis
whole
of
plan,
the
right, is that
Trump
it's supposed to
plan
drag them back into the
and
U.S.
says it would increase
But I
the
asked
nation's
anyone,
deficit
why do you
by
think they left the U.S.?
$5.8 trillion.
So it
My
makes stuff
question
cheaper.
is the same for you.
Because shocker,
How do you pay for
sweatshops in
all
China
that
tend to make
without
stuff a lot
ballooning the
cheaper than we
deficit?
can make
I'll give you 2
in the
minutes.
U.S.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz.
So it's
this
either you
evening,
have a
and just
tariff
heard
or
it
they're
in the
going
answer.
to
A lot of
impose
what
a
Kamala
20%
Harris
uptick in
proposes to
everything
do,
you buy.
and some of it, I'll be
right?
honest with
or
you, it
maybe they
even
do come back
sounds
to the U.S.
pretty good.
Congrats,
Here's
you have
what
more
won't
jobs
hear,
where we're not
is that
increasing the
Kamala
minimum
Harris
wage. You're
has
getting
already
paid like
done it,
shit.
because she's
And
been
then
the vice
everything costs
president
more
for
anyways
3.5 years.
because
She had the
being made in the U.S.
opportunity
raises
to
the
enact
cost
all of these
exponentially.
great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great
weird that
plans
Kamala
for
Harris
how to
did that. I
address
seem to
middle-class
recall her
problems,
not being
then she
president,
ought to
but maybe
do
I'm
them
mistaken.
now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can
That's it.
trust.
So I guess he's
her
admitting
actual
the fact that
plans.
Trump lost the
Now,
election.
Donald
So he
Trump's
did say the
economic
American
plan
people
is
gave her
not
the
just a
job.
plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom.
For
Because
the
Donald
record,
Trump's economic
PhD means you're
policies
smart.
delivered the highest
That takes effort.
take-home pay in a generation in
and
this country.
common sense is not a thing. Common sense is based on where you grew up. My common sense is different than somebody who grew up in a big
city. So when people say
city.
that Donald Trump's
Right? It's
economic
different than
plan
someone
doesn't
who
make
grew up in
sense,
China.
I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers.
So
now,
I hate to
Tim
say it, but I mean, I feel like a
admirably
scientist
admits
might know
that they
more
want to undo
about
the Trump
science
tax
stuff
cuts. But if you
than
look at what was so
Fred who
different
lives down the
about
street.
Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
You know what helps the
Governor,
bills?
do you want to respond
Rent
to that?
control,
What has Kamala
where
Harris done for the middle
these
class?
apartment complexes and stuff, they aren't allowed to just raise the rent by however much they want to do. Republicans don't want that.
Before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, You don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers,
To be clear,
whatever,
by the way,
how is it
people
fair
often get
that
mad
you're paying
that
your
Democrats
taxes
or
every
the
year,
left want to call
and
Trump
Donald Trump
a
hasn't paid
Nazi
any
or
federal
similar to
tax in the last
Hitler?
15 years.
Hitler
The last year as
also
president.
denounced
That's what's wrong with the
scientists
system.
and
There's a way
scholars
around it,
and
and
doctors.
he's bragged about that. We're just
It's a
asking
very
for fairness in it,
authoritarian thing
and
to
that's
do,
all you want.
right? Because you villainize everyone except yourself. You know all the
say
answers,
trust the
right?
experts.
You know what's
but
best
those
for the
same
people.
experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our
It's just an
manufacturing base
authoritarian
off to
playbook, and
China,
they're pulling
we'd
right
get
out of
cheaper
it.
goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy.
Again,
We're
his
make
way of
more
bringing
our own stuff.
American
And this isn't just an
manufacturing
economic
back,
issue.
right,
I mean, I've got three
is
beautiful little kids at home,
by
7,
causing
4,
every
and 2,
one
and
of
I
us
love them very much, and I
to
hope
pay
they're
an
in bed
additional
right
10 to
now.
20%
But
on
look,
everything
so many of
we
the
buy.
drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the
Right,
bodies
in
of our
the hope
children
that maybe
are
that'll force the
manufactured by
companies to come
nations that
back.
hate us.
It's ridiculous.
This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it
Remember,
by
any
listening to
tariffs like that,
experts.
it's
We're
not
going to
felt by
stop
the
it by
companies,
listening
it's
to
felt by
common
the
sense
consumers.
wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a
show
gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did, and then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot, I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I think
Thank
that
you,
might be the
Governor.
most straightforward
Senator
answer we're going
Vance,
to get in this
in
entire
2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his.
Well, Laptdog
if you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong
the main
about
reason
Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believe some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people.
He definitely just wants to do
rising
whatever Trump
wages,
wants.
rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United
Republicans
States senator,
had control
Congress
of
is not
Congress.
just a
So don't say
high-class
Congress
debating
was doing
society.
their
It's not
job
just
because
a forum
Donald Trump was a
for
bad
senators
leader.
and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum
You're talking,
to
it was a
govern.
much
So there were a
more
lot of things
partisan
on the border,
split in
on
the
tariffs,
Congress
for
and the House of
example,
Representatives
where I
towards
think that we could have done
Republicans
so
than the
much
Democrats
more
have
if the
now with
Republican
Democrats.
Congress and the
Yet
Democrats in
Joe
Congress
Biden and
had
Kamala Harris
been
have managed
a
to pass
little
a
bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales
Again, the question
tax.
is, would
Look,
Vance be a
the
lapdog?
one thing,
And
you're
now we're talking about
probably
tariffs.
surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 $2 a day. You're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
And remember,
Senator,
the
your
middle-class
time is
Americans
up.
are the ones who
Nora?
are paying
Thank you.
that tariff.
Now to the issue
not
of
the
reproductive
companies.
rights.
China doesn't give
Governor
a shit
Walz,
about us.
after Roe
They will
versus
just
Wade was
easily raise their
overturned,
prices to
you
make sure we
signed
pay
a
for
bill
it.
into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
Absolutely delusional.
Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion.
Vance is going to have to get off
brags
of this
about
topic
how great
so
it was
fast.
that
This
he
is
put the
awful
judges
for
in
him.
and overturned Roe
Just
versus
awful
Wade.
for Republicans in
52
general.
years of personal
Anywhere
autonomy.
that abortion's on
And
the
then he
ballot,
tells
women
us,
have
"Oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful
in
thing."
vast numbers voted in favor
Amanda
of it.
Zaworski
That's
would
why
disagree
several
with
places
you
are
on it's a
not
beautiful
even wanting
thing.
to let it on the
A
ballot. I
young
think it
bride
was
in Texas
'cause
waiting
I
for
don't
their
say wrong.
child.
I want to say
at
Georgia.
18
It was
weeks,
one of the
she
states
has a
where they
complication,
had enough
a tear in the
signatures to get it
membrane.
on the
She
ballot,
needs to
but it
go
was
in.
denied by
medical
the
care
Supreme Court
at
there.
that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right.
Let's also talk about it. He said it was
So
an
in Minnesota,
inconvenience.
what we did
He said
was
that a 12-year-old
restore
girl being raped
Roe
and
versus
impregnated by
Wade.
her
We
stepfather
made
was
sure
an
that we put
inconvenience.
women in charge of their health care.
Not just
But
2
look,
wrongs don't make a right.
this
No,
is
he
not
said it
what-
was an
if you don't know
inconvenience.
Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate
And remember,
access to
Republicans just
infertility
recently voted
treatments. For
against
so many of you out there
protecting
listening,
IVF
me included,
services.
infertility treatments are why I have a child.
And for
That's
anyone who wants to
nobody
say,
else's
oh, but the Supreme
business,
Court already said it
but
was
those
allowed.
things are
Yeah, the
being
Supreme Court also
proposed.
said that
And the
abortions were
catch-all on
federally
this
protected.
is,
And look at
well,
where we're
the
at
states
now.
will decide
We have women
what's
dying
right
because
for
of it.
Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about
If I'm not
healthcare.
mistaken, it's
In
outpacing
Minnesota,
some,
we are ranked
third world
first in
countries as
healthcare
well
for a
for
reason.
the,
We trust
mortality.
women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans
Keep in mind,
don't agree
Project 2025
with everything
is
that I've
written
ever
by
said
a
on this
ton
topic. And,
of previous workers with Donald
I
Trump.
grew up in a
Several
working-class
members of his
family in a
cabinet, several
neighborhood
members
where
of
I
his
knew a lot of young
administration
women who
all
had
helped author that
unplanned
thing.
pregnancies and decided to
goodness,
terminate
I want to say
those
just like a
pregnancies
couple months ago, he was
because
giving
they
a
feel like
speech
they didn't
at
have
a
any
Heritage
other
Foundation
options.
event, and those are the people who wrote
one of them
the
is actually
Project
very dear to
2025.
me. And I know
And
she's
Trump's name
watching
is mentioned
tonight,
over
and I love you.
300 times in
And she told
Project
me something a couple
2025.
years
Not
ago
Vance,
that
not
she
Mitt
felt
Romney,
like if
not
she hadn't
Donald,
had an
not
abortion,
Joe
that
Biden.
it
No,
would have destroyed her
Donald
life
Trump.
because she
There's
was
a
in an
plan for
abusive
Donald Trump
relationship.
to enact
And I
in
think
order to
that what I
put
take from
supreme
that as a
control
Republican
over
who
women,
proudly
supreme
wants to
control
protect
over anyone he
innocent
doesn't
life in
like.
this country,
It
who
gives him the
proudly
ability
wants
to
to protect
gut
the vulnerable,
the
is that my
administration of
party,
the
we've got to
government,
do so
and it would
much
do away
better
with
of
the
a
Department of
job
Education.
at
It would do away
earning
with
the
FEMA.
American
It would do
people's
away
trust back
with
on this issue where they
the
frankly
CDC, if
just
I'm not
don't
mistaken.
trust us. And I think that's one of the things
And
that
remember,
Donald Trump
Trump's
and I are
team,
endeavoring
Trump's
to do.
previous
I want
workers
us as a
are the ones who
Republican Party
authored that
to be pro-family in the
with him
fullest
in
sense
mind.
of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms.
That's interesting that he said he wants to
afford
support
have babies.
fertility
want it
treatments.
to
I
make it
believe he
easier for young
just voted
families
against
to afford a
protecting
home
them.
so they can afford a place to raise that family.
But
And I
he
think
don't
there's
want to
so
talk about
much that
that.
we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse,
Remember,
and let's be
Republicans would
honest,
have never
sometimes a very,
send
very
it back to the
messy
states
and divided
if
country.
most of the states
Governor,
were
would
blue.
you like to respond
They
and
sent it
also
so
answer the question
limit
about
women's rights
restrictions?
as much as
well,
possible.
The question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making child care more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Help with the
Governor,
trust.
your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion,
that is blatantly false, by the way. If anyone wants to actually read the law,
I use that word, Nora, is because
try to post it in the description.
Do you want to force
Catholic
hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from
So that's another issue
increasing
there. They don't need to do a
funding for
restoration of
children.
road.
It doesn't
They need to just
increase us
codify it
from
into
making sure
law.
that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals.
What time? I
they
mean,
get
that's up to
early
them.
childhood
You know,
education.
personally, I
they
think
get
19 weeks
healthcare.
is fair.
So the
Because, I mean,
hiding
we
behind
get
we're going to do all
consciousness
these
between
other
20
things
25
when you're
weeks. I
not
think past
proposing them in
that,
your
you know,
budget.
maybe it
Kamala
is
Harris
probably
is
a bit of an
proposing them.
issue.
She's proposing
But
all those things to make life
19 weeks
easier
for an
for families.
abortion.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a
that's plenty of
slogan as a
time.
response.
It's not the
What's up for
case.
you?
It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
I'll be right back.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
So
always send the people home happy.
I don't know if I'm the
a
only one
little
here,
more like
but
Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
This is a very boring debate. Let's be very honest here. And part of me kind of misses it. You know what I mean? Like before Trump, before Harris, before Biden. Like back in like, I don't know if anyone remembers like Obama and Mitt Romney. So like, that shit was just boring.
The thrill
right?
of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so
it's like
exhilarating.
get rid of Trump. I'll take you. I'll get rid of Harris if y'all get rid of Trump.
Fatal accidents. That's
We'll just have Walz and
Might make you look before
JD
you
Vance.
If you had
I still think Walz would
100
win,
airplanes falling out of the sky, would have a
Jesus
public
Christ, at least there'd be some big
Space
forum.
tourism, now streaming on
I'll
the
give
free
JD
CBS
Vance
News
props
app.
here. He's not accusing Haitian immigrants of eating your pets. He's not claiming we're doing abortions after birth. He did kind of lie about Walz's law there, but you know, it is what it is.
She's the first black woman on the Supreme Court, and she's determined she won't be the last.
My parents had raised me to believe that I could do anything I wanted to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on Person to Person.
Superstar approaching, superstar approaching.
I can see clearly now that the rain is gone.
That's right. Look at his outfit. Give me some love, baby.
Up top.
It's gonna be alright. Sunshiny day.
All right.
I'm trying to find the. Oh, well, never mind. I was trying to find the actual Minnesota birth abortion law. I mean, it just seems like, I mean, that stuff is blatantly false. It seems like it's just saying that, women have the right to choose. It doesn't have to be
Welcome
done at a
back to
hospital.
the
It
CBS
can be
News
done at a
vice
birthing
presidential
clinic.
debate. We want to
Bunch of other
turn now
stuff.
to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in
And
prison.
rightfully so, for anyone
Do
who
you
wants to
think
read the
holding
indictments on that.
parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of three beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in second grade.
It wasn't the most recent.
And like a
big
lot
one,
of
but the one
parents,
before
we send
that.
our kids to school with such hope and
The
such
parents were
joy
literally
and such
texting
pride
him,
at their little faces on the first
joking
day of
about,
school. And we
don't do that,
know,
don't do this,
unfortunately,
we know
that
you're
a
not supposed
lot
to
of
have a
kids are going to
gun.
experience this terrible
And
epidemic
they're
of
even
gun
sent to
violence.
the
And of
school that
course,
day and
our hearts
refused
go
to
out
take
to the
the kid out
families
of
that are
class.
affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have
shoots
to
up
do
the
better.
school.
And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a kid taking it from his parent in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So
the
that
vast
number,
majority
the
of mass
amount of
shootings in this
illegal
country
guns in our
are
country is
done
higher
with
today
legally
than it
purchased
was
firearms.
3.5 years ago.
Right? This isn't stuff
But
off
what
the
do we
black
do about
market,
the
right? You're not
schools? What do
buying
we
these
do
from
to
some
protect our
shady
kids?
vendor.
And
No,
I
you're
think
buying
the
these at
answer
Walmart,
is,
you're buying
and
these
I
at
say this
Academy,
not
or
loving
at
the answer,
Cabela's, and
because
they're
I don't want my
murdering
kids to
people
go
with
to
them.
school
The
in
vast
a
majority.
school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of
I
security.
mean, that's typical
But
for
I
Republicans. They
unfortunately think that
don't
we
want to
have
give you
to
the
increase
source.
security
So yeah,
in
maybe it
our
is something like
schools. We have to
90% are
make the
legally
doors
obtained
lock better. We have to
from
make the
stealing
doors
it from your
stronger.
parents,
We've
or
got to make
giving
the
a
windows
gun
stronger.
to
And
someone
of
who's
course,
under
we've got to
21 or
increase
18,
school
depending on where
resource
you're at.
officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out.
Right.
In
I feel like a
Minnesota,
majority of
we've
Democrats, they aren't
enacted
wanting to just
enhanced
remove guns, right?
red flag laws,
I think the majority of people
enhanced
just they
background
want red
checks.
flag
And we can
laws.
start
They
to
want
get
the,
data, but here's the
enhanced
problem.
background checks.
If we really want to
Personally, I
solve
think we
this,
should have
we've got
classes
folks
that you should have to
won't
take,
allow
permits
research
we
to
got.
be even done on gun violence. And
Why
this
is it harder
idea
for me
that
to
we
get a
should just
driver's
live with it,
license
and
and drive a
here's what I
vehicle
do think,
than it is
this
for me
is
to
a
get an
good start to the
AR-15?
conversation.
As much
I
as anyone wants to
100%
try to
believe
act
that
like it's
Senator
not the case,
Vance
you can do a
hates
hell
it
of a
when
lot
these
more
kids
damage with
get-
an
it's a
AR-15
four,
than
and
you
it breaks
can
your
a
heart.
four-door
I
sedan.
agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference.
I think in
It's
Finland, by
not
the way, you're not allowed to have
infringing
any
on your
ammo in
Second
the gun. It
Amendment.
has to
And
be
the
stored
idea to
separately.
have some
If
of
it's at
these
your house,
weapons out
the
there,
ammo
it
and the
just
gun stuff
doesn't
have to
make
be
any sense.
kept in
Kamala
separate
Harris, as an
safes.
attorney
Safes,
general,
my bad.
worked on this issue. She knows that it's there.
There
no
are
one's
solutions.
trying
It's
to
just Republicans
scaremonger
vote
and say
against
we're
them
taking your
every
guns,
single
but
time.
I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse.
Okay, let's bring up mental health. Republicans voted against having increased mental health in our schools.
Depression,
like
way
mental
higher
health
rates of
counselors
anxiety.
and classes.
We unfortunately have a
Republicans
mental health
voted
crisis in this
that.
country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it's only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those
Sandy
parents.
All of them
I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes remember, it just is the guns.
Very clear.
It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect the Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was.
You're able to buy land, build a
house
house on your land.
I'm thinking of Christmas services after
but nowadays
midnight mass
it's very
where you go with your family.
And I don't know if anyone lives like a smaller town. You're not going to see 3, 4, 5-story apartment buildings. You're not going to see tons and tons and tons of houses.
Bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim.
It's because Trump had them kill the bill. That's why he did it, by the way.
Competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream.
Take a civics class. You can go on YouTube. You can find it like an 8-hour civics class.
Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for a national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Remember, Trump wants to get rid of that, by the way.
We're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members
private
have
insurance
gotten
companies
health
could not
care.
discriminate on you for,
I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time
in an effort to
under
lower
Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concept of a plan.
It reduces it for the people who aren't sick.
It's very simple common sense. I think it's Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress. You're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency.
Republicans
Think
voted
about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice, and will also drive down costs.
Only because Kamala Harris did the tie-breaking vote in favor of it.
The reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along.
Do anything with
I think this is an important point about
he said he was
President
going to
Trump.
repeal
Of course, you don't have to
replace
agree
it.
with
He never
everything
did that at
President
all.
Trump has
That's a
ever
blatant
said
lie.
or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Anything to it.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is—
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California.
I mean, women, I think the mothers get it significantly. Almost everywhere you get some maternity leave. But wherever you get paternity leave,
also
in several other countries
healthy.
You are.
We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
$50 or something.
Thank you, Senator.
They're working minimum wage and affording a
Walz,
house after a year.
Your ticket also has some child care tax credit
like 90% 8%, I believe.
Do you think Congress will agree to
right
the
now we're at
$6,000 credit for
18%?
newborns and $3,000 credit for children
20%?
over the
I
age of
forget.
6, as your campaign
Definitely
has
not
promised?
90%.
Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results.
Zero
Judges,
evidence
including
in
those
any of
appointed
them, by
by
the way,
President Trump
in case you
and
didn't
other
remember.
Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to
just
figure out how to
say
solve the
yes.
inflation
That's all you have
crisis
to do.
caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president, Donald Trump left the White House, and now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration.
I know you're going to go peacefully.
I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years.
So to be
now,
clear,
I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats,
misinformation in an effort to
have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition.
Basically
of course,
telling people,
they don't
hey,
agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues, and that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state Capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting,
didn't like the insurrection
Mike
either.
Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened
J.D. Vance was
on January 6th, the
would you
first
certify
time
the
in
election?
American history,
He said
that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power.
Disgusting.
And here we are
And
4 years
un-American.
later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it.
Well, at the other debate, he's like, no,
that for
I
years
never
in
said I
this
lost the
country,
election.
Democrats protested the results of
So
elections.
did he peacefully hand
Hillary
over
Clinton
the
in
power, or did he
2016
win the election?
said that Donald Trump had the election
really do both.
stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
It very much is a problem that Republicans had.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was
very clear.
that happened.
We were never as
Donald
divided
Trump
as we
can
are
do it. And
now
all
until
of us say
Donald
there's
Trump
no
took
place
office
for this. It has
and lied
massive
for months
repercussions.
and months
This idea
about
that there's
widespread
censorship
voter
to
fraud
stop
when there's
people from
literally
doing-
none.
threatening to
68
kill
lawsuits,
someone,
every
threatening to do
single one
something.
thrown out
That's not
because there's
censorship.
no
Censorship
evidence.
is book banning. We've
Fox
seen that.
News
We've seen
spread
that
this
brought up.
massive lie
I
saying
just
that the
think
Dominion
for
voting machines
everyone
were like
tonight,
Russian backed and hacked.
I'm gonna
Fox News had to
thank
pay
Senator
like
Vance.
something like
I
$280
think this is the
million
conversation
in
they
a
want to
defamation
hear.
lawsuit
And I
because
think
of
there's a
them
lot of
lying.
agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart.
And defamation isn't something you can
This
just
was a
get
threat
for
to our
lying. No,
democracy
you have to
in a
lie
way that
about
we had
somebody.
not
It
seen.
has to be
And it
false
manifested
information. It
itself
has to be
because
done
of Donald Trump's
maliciously, which is
inability
very
to
hard
say
to prove in
he
a
is
criminal
still
court or a
saying
civil court.
He didn't lose the election. I would just
And
say,
they lost.
did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala
Exactly. You
Harris
can't answer the
censor
question.
Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is
Has she tried to-
that is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020.
Did
We've
Donald
talked
Trump
about
lose
it.
the election?
I'm happy
Why
to
can you
talk
not
about
just
it
say
further.
yes?
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the
Push
First
him on
Amendment.
it, man.
You
If you
yourself
push
have
him
said
on this,
there's
I mean,
no First
just
Amendment
don't let
right to
it change.
misinformation.
Next
Kamala
question.
Harris wants
Did
to
Donald
use the
Trump
power
lose
of
the
the
election?
government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look,
if you believe
when Mike Pence
that Donald Trump
made
did
that
not lose that
decision
debate,
to certify that election,
un-American and
that's why Mike
completely
Pence isn't on
delusional.
this stage. What I'm concerned about is
there's no
where is the
proof that he
firewall
won. right?
Donald
He
Trump.
lost the popular vote both
Where is the
times, mind you.
firewall
Even whenever
if he
against Hillary, he
knows
lost the popular vote.
He could do
He lost the
anything,
electoral
including
college vote, and then he tried
taking
to
an
lie
election,
and have Mike Pence
and
say,
his
"Oh,
vice
we don't know
president's
which
not gonna
electors
stand
are
to it.
real."
That's what we're asking you,
so that it will
America.
get sent back to the
Will
House.
you stand up?
It's
Will you keep
ridiculous.
your oath of office?
Trump lost the
even
election,
if the
and if you
president
believe
doesn't.
otherwise,
And I think
you
Kamala
just
Harris would agree.
take
She
your head
wouldn't
out of your
pick me
fucking
if she
ass.
didn't think I would do
Jesus
that.
Christ.
Because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
To be clear, for January 6th, it's undisputed that Trump's team hired a false set of electors. I believe it was 7 sets for the swing states. And what those people did is they forged themselves and said they were the duly elected electors. Right? They were not. They were sent to the Capitol, and you can see a video of this, where they claimed, right? Let's mute this real quick. They claimed, right, that they were the duly elected electors when they weren't. The other electors were already on site, and you can see a video of this where they're trying to get into the actual Capitol building, and they were declined, right? The goal of them was, and we know this for a fact, it was to get in there and have Mike Pence, and Donald Trump said, quote, on Twitter, quote, Mike Pence needs to come through for us, end quote. He's referring to this. Whenever he wanted Mike Pence to say, hey, we don't know which one of these electors are the real electors, why don't we just have a little bit of a vote about it? And what that was going to do is send the election back to the House. Every single vote cast, both for Trump and for Biden, was going to be thrown out, right? Just straight up discarded, and have the House vote. Each member, each state would have one vote. Shocker, there are more Republican states than Democrat states, all right? So you'd have something like a vote of like, what, 30 to 20, something like that? And I don't even know if it's that big. It might be something a lot closer, maybe something like 27 to 23. At that point, that would have decided the election. 50 voters would have decided the entire election. That's what Trump wanted to do, because Trump knew he'd win. That was cheating. He lied. He wanted that to happen, right? And a key piece of evidence for that, right, was the fact that for months and months and months, he was claiming there's this voter fraud, right, with no proof. He is calling the DOJ and telling them, hey, I need you to tell all these states that we found voter fraud. And they're like, hey, we don't have any voter fraud, right? He's like, don't care. Tell them. I want you to tell them. A president's never done that before, right? Thankfully, the DOJ is like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And then Trump threatened to fire them all and replace them. And then the entire DOJ is like, fuck, if you fire our head guy, we're all going to quit. And so he didn't do it, right? He couldn't follow through with it. The whole thing is unreal. But the thing is Republicans have ate this like orange Kool-Aid from the beginning, and they believe everything comes out of this man's mouth. They're making, what, like gospel songs about Trump right now? When, bro, it's just unreal. It is shocking to me that anyone's willing to listen to what he has to say with any realism there. Like, bro's over here spouting stuff about cats and dogs, right? He thinks that Democrats are trying to kill babies after they're born. He doesn't know where he's at. He talks about electric sharks. And he has, what, 50% of the vote right now? Or I guess 47? What's going on? It's unreal. But you got Trump and you got Kamala Harris. You know, she's got some bad stuff in her past. She was a prosecutor. She was a district attorney. She was an attorney general. She was a senator. And now she's the vice president. She put forth a ton of different programs to help prisoners stay out of prison once they were out. She put out programs to help the youth stay from getting into prison, keep them out of prison. Yeah, crazy. Trump has, what, 6 major bankruptcies. Every venture he's ever gone down failed. In the 70s, he and his father were sued for discrimination, and they settled it because they knew they were going to lose in court. because he was blatantly just not renting to black people. It's unreal.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statements. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe this. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. Trump said that on day one he's going to be a dictator and the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
Yeah, I'm tired, like awfully tired. So, did they shake hands? I missed it. Hold on. Oh. Oh well. But man, I gotta work in the morning. I'm gonna leave you with this. Kamala Harris, the vice president, she is the president of the Senate, meaning she is allowed to take place in tie-breaking votes. If Biden dies, she becomes president, and she's there to say, hey, this election was normal. We're good. That's her whole job. That's it. She doesn't make laws. Not yet. And she certainly doesn't control the border. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And J.D. Vance refused to say that Donald Trump lost the election.
Issues on the question of the
Leave you
top
at
of the
that.
news today, which is the
Adios,
Middle East
mi
and the
amigos.
kinds of foreign policy surprises that hit